The child was not dying. That was the first thing I understood, and it was worse than death. She was being emptied. Dal carried her through the temple doors at the 3rd hour past midnight, and I already knew before they crossed the threshold. The air changed. Not the way it changes when grief enters a room. Grief, I know. Grief has a smell, something between copper and turned soil. This was different. This was the smell of before. Before salt, before stone. Before the first creature drew breath and had no name for what it was doing. I had not smelled that in a very long time. The child's name was Iris. She was 7 years old and she had stopped speaking for days ago. Not because she couldn't. Dal would tell me this with hands that couldn't stop moving. Touching her daughter's hair, her wrist, the collar of her dress as if checking she was still solid. Iris had stopped speaking because something had told her to be quiet, and she had listened. What tells a 7-year-old to be quiet and is obeyed? I looked at the girl on my altar stone. Her chest rose. Her chest fell. Her eyes were open and they tracked nothing. Not the torchlight, not her mother's face, not me. Whatever she was watching, it was not in this room. And here is what I had not told anyone in 3,000 years. I recognized this. Not the child, not the mother. The signature underneath, pressed into the girl's sternum like a seal into warm wax. I had seen it once before, and the last time I saw it, there were no gods yet to name what I was seeing. What follows a child into a temple that has stood for centuries, walks through protections carved by hands that are now dust, and leaves no mark on the door, nothing that was born after the world began. If this story pulled you in, like the video, and follow Medusa's Memories. Tell us, what state are you listening from? Dal dropped to her knees before she finished walking through the door. Not in reverence, her legs gave out. She caught herself on the altar's edge, both palms flat against the stone. And she did not look up at me. She looked at her daughter, already laid across the surface, already to still. She won't wake up, Dal said. It's been 2 days. 2 days with open eyes, and no one behind them. I had seen that before. Soldiers, mostly. Men who had watched something the mind refused to carry. They came back eventually, or they didn't. But this girl had not been in a war. She was 7. She smelled of cedar soap and the particular sweetness of a child who has been carried a long distance by someone who loves her. Her sandals had worn through at the heel. Dal had carried her most of the way. And underneath all of that, the other thing, I pressed her fingers to Iris's sternum. The contact lasted less than a second. That was enough. The signature was not metaphor. It was structural, a pressure against the inside of her ribcage, the way a river reshapes stone not by force but by persistence. Something had been running through this child for days. It had not arrived for days ago. It had been building for longer, patient the way only very old things are patient, the way glaciers are patient, the way the dark between stars does not rush. I removed my fingers. The serpents around my skull shifted, all of them orienting toward the girl simultaneously, a low sound in their movement, like wind through stone passages. I did not tell them to stop. They were reading the same thing I was reading, and they were better at not lying to themselves about it. When did she stop eating? I asked, 6 days ago. Dal's voice was controlled in the way that voices are controlled when the person speaking has been crying without. Stopping for so long that they have run out of the physical capacity for tears. She drinks water if I hold the cup. She doesn't ask for it, doesn't ask, doesn't speak, doesn't look. A child erasing herself from the outside in. I walked the perimeter of the altar. The torches on the north wall were burning lower than the others, not dying, just pulling in a different direction, their flames leaning toward the altar the way compass needles lean toward something that should not be magnetic. I had not lit those torches to behave this way. They had been burning in this configuration for 800 years without incident. Something in this room was changing the physics of the room. How did you find this temple? I asked. Dal looked up for the first time. Her eyes were the gray of overcast mornings, red at the rims, the whites carrying the particular texture of someone who has not slept in days. Iris found it. 3 weeks ago, she started drawing it. The columns, the doors, the pattern on the threshold. She had never been here. She had never left the valley we live in. A pause. The kind that contains something the person does not know how to give words to yet. She drew your face, too. The serpents on my head moved. All of them, simultaneously. That almost never happens. I looked at the girl again. 7 years old, chest rising, chest falling. Eyes open, watching nothing in this room. And 3 weeks ago, before whatever entered her had made itself fully known, she had dreamed her way to my door. Mapped it. Had put my face on paper with hands too small to hold certainty, and had been right. Why would something that old need a 7-year-old to find me? Unless it already knew where I was. And the child wasn't a map. The child was a message. The stone beneath my feet hummed. Not vibration subtler than that. A frequency below hearing. The kind you feel in the back molars. In the fine bones behind the ear. It lasted approximately 3 seconds. Then it stopped. The torches on the north wall straightened. How long until dawn? I asked. Dal looked at the doors. 3 hours. Maybe less. 3 hours. The signature inside Iris was not static. I had felt it moving when I touched her. A slow current. The direction of something that has a destination. It was not simply inside her. It was using her as a route. And routes, if left open, become permanent. I needed to understand what I was dealing with before the sun came up. Not because sunlight would help. Because when this had happened before, the one time, the only chimmy time, not to even a memory, it'd been night. And whatever this was, it was more present in the dark. I walked to the lamp at the east column and turned the wick down. Then the one at the west column. The room darkened to the threshold of vision, enough to see shapes, enough to see the altar, enough to see Dal's face when I needed to read it. Not enough to give my eyes something to focus on. In the new dimness, the leaning of the north wall torches was more visible. Stay by her, I said to Dal. What are you going to do? Listen. Dal put both hands on Iris's arm, one above the elbow, one below, as though holding a splint in place. She sat very still. She had the quality, in that moment, of someone who has decided that stillness is the last available form of competence. I stood in the center of the room and I listened not with ears. Ears are useful instruments, but they have a limited range. What I was doing was older than ears, the particular orientation of awareness that predates sense organs, that existed in the time before things had agreed to have consistent forms. I spread it outward from the center of my chest, the way you spread. Your hand flat on a table to feel what is moving underneath. There, not in the north wall, deeper, below the floor. Below the flagstones, below the packed earth under the flagstones, below that, in the bedrock. A slow pulse, steady as a tide, patient as weather, not a heartbeat, a presence. Something that did not need to breathe, did not need to announce itself. Was simply there the way the bedrock was there, as foundational fact. It had been there longer than the temple. I thought about that for a moment. Longer than the temple meant longer than the 8 centuries since I built it, longer than the settlement before it. Longer than the first people who had understood, without articulating why. That this particular piece of ground felt different from the ground around it, and had begun to bring their most serious questions here. They had felt it without knowing what they were feeling. They had been leaving offerings above something that did not need offerings, and did not care about them, but was, perhaps, faintly amused. 3 hours, and a child breathing on my altar stone with something ancient, running through her like a river that is not done carving. She won't die tonight, I told Dal. I said it because it was true. I said it because I needed her to stop shaking. I did not tell her the rest. The rest was that tonight might be the last night. Dying was still on the table as an option. What came after, if I let the connection run its course, would be something Dal did not have words for, and I did not have the mercy to explain. Iris blinked, once, slowly. Her eyes moved, not tracking, not focusing, just shifting, a degree to degrees to the left, toward the north wall, toward whatever was making the torches lean. She could see it. Whatever it was already in the room with us. And the child was the only one who had eyes calibrated to look at it directly. I placed my palm flat on the floor, cold, solid. The deep grain of Mediterranean limestone under my skin, the specific weight of a stone that has held its position for 8 centuries. The pulse came through it like a word in a language I had not spoken since before the first dynasty had a name. I recognized the grammar. I stood up slowly. 3,000 years. That was how long I had managed not to think about this. Not actively suppressed. I am too old for suppression to work for long. Simply allowed to recede. The way you allow a difficult country to recede in the rearview of continuous time. You don't forget it. You just stop facing it. I was facing it now. And it was, apparently, facing me back. The north wall moved. Not these stones, the space in front of the stones. A compression the way air compresses before a thunderstorm, except localized. A column approximately the width of a man, approximately the height of a man, approximately where a man would stand if a man was standing there watching us. It did not take a shape. It gathered. What's happening? Dal was on her feet, back against the east wall, eyes moving between me and the nothing on the north side that was behaving like a something. Don't move, I said. The gathered space pulsed. Once, twice. A rhythm that was not a heartbeat. It had no acceleration, no biological irregularity. It was the rhythm of a thing that does not have a body and is not pretending otherwise. This was not a ghost. Ghosts remember being human. They carry the texture of the lives they lost. They have specific griefs, specific wants. Ghosts smell like unfinished things, like wet wool, like a door left open in winter. This had no smell at all. In the precise location where it was gathering, the air had gone neutral. Not cold, not stale. Absent of the particular chemical record that accumulated air carries, the scent of the lamp oil. The incense ground into the stone floor over centuries, the dry grass smell of the rush mats near the door. It had not replaced those smells with anything. It had simply subtracted them, made a space where the world's ordinary accumulation was not. This had no want I could name. It had a direction, and the direction was Iris. The altar stone cracked. Not shattered a single clean line, running from the left edge to the center, as if something had pressed down on one side from beneath. I heard the sound before I understood what caused it. A deep, structural note, the sound a mountain makes when the thing it has been resting on shifts. Iris didn't react. The crack ran directly beneath her spine. That stone is 3,000 years old, Dal said, her voice pulled to a thread. I know how old it is. You don't look surprised. I wasn't. What I was something I had not been since before the Greek ships stopped sailing. I was recalibrating, taking in information and revising every assumption I had built in the last 10 minutes. The pulse I had felt through the floor, the way the signature inside Iris moved like something with a destination. The fact that the presence had been in the bedrock long before tonight. I was building a picture I did not like the shape of. I had thought the presence was using Iris as a route to enter the temple. But the crack beneath the altar, that crack ran in the direction of the central support column, which ran down into bedrock, which ran into the ancient consecrations I had carved before the first priests of this region had learned to write. The crack wasn't damage, it was a signature. The presence wasn't entering through the child. It was entering through the foundation. It had been underneath this temple. It had waited patient in the way that only things without sequence can be patient. And tonight something had changed. Something had given it a signal, the child arriving, my hands on her sternum. The recognition I had not been able to stop myself from feeling. It had felt me recognize it. And it had answered. I moved to the west column and put my back against it. From here I could see the gathered space and the altar and Dal and the door. Sight lines, exits, the things you assess automatically when you have survived as long as I have. Dal, my voice was level. Leveling it cost something. 3 weeks ago, did anything change in your house? A sound. A smell, something that disappeared. Dal's jaw tightened. Her hands were pressed flat against the east wall behind her, fingers spread, as though she needed to feel the stone to confirm it was still there. Our threshold stone. The one my grandmother carved. Protection symbols, old ones. It cracked. I thought the frost. It wasn't frost. Then what was it? I didn't answer that yet. I was watching the gathered space. It had changed texture again, denser near the top, which, in a being with a body, would suggest something like a head, something like attention directed downward. The way a person stands when they are looking at something on the floor. It was looking at the crack, at its own signature, admiring the work, or reading it, or something. I did not have the language. For because the relationship an anterior thing has with the marks it leaves in the physical world is not a relationship I could fully translate into terms that had been coined after time acquired a direction. The gathered space pulsed again. This time something came with it, a sound, subsonic, too low for the ears but entirely audible to the part of the nervous system that controls the instinct to flee. Dal made a sound, not a word, just a sound, and pressed harder against the east wall. Iris turned her head, all the way to the left. Smooth as water. The movement had no hesitation, no biological stiffness of a body coming out of stillness. Her neck rotated with the frictionless ease of something that was not controlled by the usual mechanisms. She was looking directly at the gathered space. And the gathered space shifted. The compression changed, subtly, the way a presence shifts when it becomes aware that it has been seen. It had been watching the room. Now, it was watching the child, who was watching it back. Iris. Dal moved toward her daughter. Don't. I caught Dal's arm. Her muscles were rigid under my hand, the entire forearm locked. Don't break her line of sight. Why? I did not answer immediately. I was doing something I rarely have to do, accessing a memory that far back. Before names. Before the architecture of the world settled into its current agreement. There had been something, not an event, because events require time, and this predated the organization of time. There had been a condition, an earlier condition, before cause and effect had established their working relationship. I had existed during that condition. I had existed before it had fully resolved into the world I now moved through. And during that condition, there had been things that were not beings, not forces, not concepts. They were simply anterior. They predated category. This was one of them. "It's not here for her," I said. "It came through her." "But she's not what it wants." Dal's arm was rigid under my hand. "Then what does it want?" The frequency in the floor returned, stronger. The torches on the north wall flickered, not from wind, from presence. From the fact that something was standing in that column of gathered air, and it was paying very close attention to the conversation happening 6 feet from it. I let go of Dal's arm. I looked at the north wall directly. I had been avoiding it. Not from fear, from caution. But caution had a cost tonight. The cost was ignorance. And ignorance in the next 2 hours could cost Iris the rest of her interior life. "It wants to know," I said, "if I'm still here." The gathered space stopped pulsing, complete stillness. And then, in the silence, the crack in the altar stone extended to more inches toward the column, slow, deliberate. The way a sentence extends when the thing writing it is not done. It had heard me. It knew I was here. It had written its response in 3,000-year-old stone. And I had until dawn to decide what to write back. I told Dal to sit on the floor with her back against the altar and not look at the north wall. She did it without arguing. That was how I knew she had understood, on some level below language, that the normal rules of this situation did not apply. People argue when they believe argument is a tool that works. Dal had stopped believing that somewhere in the last 30 seconds. She lowered herself to the floor, pulled her knees to her chest, put her chin on her knees. Her breathing was deliberate, in through the nose, out through the mouth. The breathing of someone applying technique to panic. I began at the east wall and I walked the room. Not a ritual. I want to be precise about this. It was architectural. I was reading the space, the way a builder reads a structure before deciding where to cut. Every room has a grammar. Mine had been stable for centuries. I knew every deviation, the cold spot near the second column that had appeared after a winter storm in the 14th century. The slight magnetic disturbance near the doorframe that had been there since, before I built the door. The way the south wall sweated in summer, leaving pale mineral traces on the stone that I had long since stopped cleaning because they had become part of the texture of the place, the accumulated record of the building doing what buildings do over time. I was checking what it felt like now. The answer was compressed, not smaller. The dimensions were unchanged. But the space between objects had a different density, a thickness in the air. The way a room feels when too many people have been breathing in it for too long. Except what was creating the pressure had no lungs, no expelled heat, no physical mass to account for it. It occupied the north quadrant most heavily. But it was not contained there. It had seeped. While I had been standing at the altar talking to Dal, it had been slowly saturating the room the way cold saturates a stone floor. Not a single point of origin, but a gradual suffusion through every surface, working inward from the walls, patient and thorough and entirely without urgency. This was very bad. I stopped at the second column. One of my serpents, Cory, the oldest, the one that stays coiled against the left side of my skull and rarely moves unprompted. She was extended, not in threat posture. In the posture she uses when something is very close to us, and I have not noticed. Her tongue tested the air in short, rapid movements. 3 times. 4. She retracted it and held completely still, which was worse than the testing. I raised my hand slowly and let her nose touch my palm. She was trembling. Corey does not tremble. "Tell me," I said quietly. Not for Dal to hear, for Corey, in the way you speak to something old that has been with you long enough to understand what you need from it. Corey moved her head toward the altar. Not the north wall, the altar, where Iris was. I turned. Iris was sitting up, both hands in her lap, fingers interlaced, a pose of composed stillness that no 7-year-old arranges herself into naturally. Her eyes were still open, still tracking nothing in this room. But she was upright, with the posture of someone who has been positioned there, not by force, not by pain, but by instruction. And her lips were moving, no sound. Just the shapes of words. I crossed the room in 5 steps. Crouched in front of her, put my face at her level. The temperature near the altar was lower than the rest of the room. I felt it on the skin of my forearms, the back of my neck. Something had pulled the heat from this specific location. I watched her lips. The shapes were not Greek. Not any dialect, any variant, any dead branch of any living or dead language I had heard in 4,000 years of listening. The phonology was wrong in a way that was not random but precise, not broken, not babbled, different, the way a river and a road are both ways of getting somewhere. But they do not share logic or grammar or any of the assumptions the other runs on. She was speaking the anterior language. Iris. I kept my voice even. Iris, look at me. Her lips kept moving. Iris. She blinked. The movement was too slow, too mechanical. Not her blink, the interval was wrong. The eyelid descended and lifted at a rate that nothing biological produces naturally. Not her blink, but then she was looking at me, not through me. At me. Both eyes tracking, focused, present, and behind them, sharing the space with whatever was still present in her. Something that recognized me with a specificity that had nothing to do with being 7 years old in a temple at midnight. Don't, Dal said from behind me, sharp. She does that, and then she doesn't come back for hours. But Iris was already here, returned. Whatever had been using her face to look at me had withdrawn to the margins of her expression, leaving the girl intact and watching me with the focused attention of a child who has been told to deliver a message and wants to get it right. The presence was not observing through the child. It was consulting through her. It had found a way to use her not as a doorway, but as a translator, something that could speak the language it spoke and produce sounds a human throat could approximate. Which meant it could not talk to me directly, which meant there were rules. There were limits. Whatever this was, it was not omnipotent. It was constrained by the same architecture of existence that constrained everything else. It needed a body to produce language. It had taken the nearest available one. A 7-year-old girl who had been drawing my temple in her sleep. Dal. I did not turn around. Come here. Keep your hand on her arm. I heard Dal move. Heard her sharp breath when she saw her daughter's face. Felt her settle on the altar edge, hand wrapped around Iris's forearm, knuckles white. What's it doing to her? Dal asked, borrowing her. Can you stop it? Here was the problem. If I severed the connection now, forcibly, I would eject whatever was using Iris as a conduit. But the connection was structural by this point. It had been running for days. Severing it was not like closing a door. It was like removing a river from a canyon. The canyon keeps the shape of the river long after the water is gone. Iris would keep the shape of whatever had been running through her. What shape that left her in, I did not know. And if I left the connection intact, if I let the presence use her as a translator, If I listened further, to saturate more of the room, to find the weakest points in the consecrations under the foundation and begin the work of widening them. 2 options. Both destroyed something. This was a familiar geography. I had stood at this crossroads more times than I could count, beside more people who would be harmed regardless of which direction I chose. The immortal's particular tax: you stop looking for the right answer. You look for the answer you can carry. Iris's lips stopped moving. The room contracted. It was fast, a single pulse, like a door slamming in a distant room. The gathered space on the north wall collapsed inward. The torches guttered simultaneously. Dal's hand on Iris's arm tightened and Iris swayed forward. Once, the way a person sways when something they were leaning against is suddenly removed. Then the room expanded, and it was wrong. The cold was everywhere. Not temperature, texture. The specific texture of anterior time, which is not cold the way winter is cold, but cold the way the space between stars is cold. An absence of the kind of warmth that requires something to have happened first. Every object in the room was still where it had been, but the space between the objects had changed its quality. The air I was breathing was still air, but it no longer felt like air that had been breathed before and would be breathed again, that existed inside the continuous chain of ordinary physical cause and effect. It felt like the air before the first breath, before breathing was a concept. The presence was no longer in the north quadrant. It was in all 4 walls. Cori dropped back against my skull and drew herself tight into the posture she has used only once before in her entire existence. The posture that means, I cannot protect you from this. That was when the altar stone cracked again. Not the existing fracture extending, a new one, perpendicular to the first, forming a cross directly beneath where Iris sat. And from the intersection, a sound. Not from the stone, from below the stone. Below the foundation, below the bedrock. A sound with no analog in any living language, but which I recognize the way you recognize a voice you have. Not heard since before you had words for the act of recognizing. It was saying my name, not Medusa, the other one. The one I had before. What happens when something older than the gods knows your name? What can be taken from someone who cannot die? The sound came through the floor, and it had weight. I felt it in my sternum, in the long bones of my legs, in the roots of every serpent on my head, a vibration that was not sound anymore but force, organized force, the kind that knows what it is doing. The altar shook, the crack split. Iris slid for inches toward the edge. Dal caught her. The column of gathered air on the north wall reconstituted itself in less than a second, faster than before, denser than before, and taller. It reached the ceiling. It pressed against the ancient carvings I had set into the rafters before the first dynasty of priests knew this region existed. And where it pressed, the carvings went dark. Not damaged, muted. The language still carved there, legible, intact, but the intention behind the language pulled out of them like marrow from bone. The words remained. The force I had placed inside them over centuries did not. My protections were being disassembled. Not by attack, by seniority. I moved to the center of the room. Say it. My voice filled the space. I was not shouting. I was speaking at the volume you use, when you are certain you will be heard, when there is no question of distance or distraction. Only the question of whether the thing you are addressing will choose to respond. Say it or stop. But don't use the child. The column contracted to seconds of absolute stillness. Then it moved. To me. It crossed the room in no time. Not quickly, not slowly. In no time. Present at the north wall and then present in front of me. and the temperature at the center of the room dropped. My breath was visible suddenly, a small cloud, dissipating. Behind me, I heard Dal make a sound, not a word, the sound that comes before words. The purely physical response of a nervous system registering that something in the environment has changed in a way the conscious mind has not caught up to yet. The column of pressure was close enough that I could feel it the way you feel a hand before it touches your face. It pressed, not physically against cognition, against the part of me that processes sequence, cause and effect, before and after. I felt my sense of time destabilize, the particular vertigo of anterior contact, where the agreed-upon direction of time becomes a preference rather than a law, where past and present lose their rigid positions and fold toward each other like the pages of a book held at the spine. I had felt this once before. I knew what it wanted. It wanted me to remember the condition I had existed in before the current agreement. The state before sequence. The open field of what I had been when I had a different name, and time was not yet committed to a direction. I grabbed the nearest support column with both hands. The stone was cold, physical cold. Real cold. I pressed my palms flat and I held the specific grit of limestone under my fingers. The particular weight of a column that has stood for 8 centuries. The smell of old oil from the lamp brackets. The sound of Iris breathing on the altar behind me. Her exhale, her inhale, the small human rhythm of a body running itself, without instruction. This is real. This is now. This is the room I built. The reaching stopped. Not because it couldn't continue. Because I had given it nothing to hold. I turned to face it fully. The serpents erupted. All 17, simultaneously, not in the synchronized posture of threat, but in the disorganized explosion of pain. Flaring out from my skull in every direction, mouths open. The sound they make when something is being done to them that cannot be fought with the body. A sound like stripped wire. Like the specific frequency of something tearing along its own grain. I did not stop them. I could not. The presence had not touched them deliberately. It had simply been close, and proximity to something that anterior, for things that exist inside time, is its own kind of damage. You know what I was, I said. My voice was steady. It costs me nothing to speak steadily. I have had for 1,000 years of practice at voices that cost less than they should. I know what you are. We are the only 2 things in this room that predate the current agreement. So let's negotiate on those terms. The column pulsed once. A different rhythm, slower, attentive. You came through the child, I said. You disassembled my threshold. You have been in my foundation for longer than a month, and you waited until I touched her, until I recognized you, to answer. Which means you needed my recognition first. The column held its new density, listening. I'm not going back, I said. The column stilled. Whatever you came to offer, or take, or show me, I'm not going back. I exist in forward time. I exist in this room, in this hour, with this child and this woman. I chose that when I chose to have a name at all. That choice is not available for renegotiation. The column contracted, not in anger. There was nothing in it that organized itself into anger, but in something that was. If the presence had been capable of syntax, the closest available approximation to sorrow, I felt it, the thing I had not been prepared for. Something corresponding, in me, to the same. Corey dropped from her position against my skull. She hung, extended, limp, the length of her fully expressed, the way a rope goes when the tension holding it leaves all at once. Not dead, but the color of her scales had changed. The deep iridescent green she had held for 4,000 years had faded to the grey-green of lichen of old leaves of things that are moving toward a different state. The presence had touched her when I remembered. And the touch had done what anterior contact always does to things that exist inside time. It showed her how old she was. All of it at once. Every year she had accumulated since the moment she first opened her eyes in my hair, as a young serpent in a world that was much newer than it was now. Corey was ancient. But she was inside time. She had a history, a sequence. The presence had let her feel all of them simultaneously, not as damage, but as truth. A truth her body was not structured to hold without cost. She coiled around my fingers without strength. Her scales were cool and dry and dimmed. I held her in my palm and I felt, with the visceral specificity of something you have carried, for so long it has become part of your weight. What it costs when the oldest thing you carry is made to feel its own age all at once. Iris spoke. Out loud, in Greek. In her own voice, high and clear and completely certain. The voice of a 7-year-old who has been given a message and takes the responsibility of it seriously. It says you are still you. It wanted to make sure. I looked at her. She was fully present. Both eyes tracking, color in her face, hands gripping her mother's sleeve with the ordinary grip of a child who is not going anywhere. The vacancy was gone. Whatever had been behind her eyes had retreated, leaving the girl intact. Looking at me with the particular gravity of someone delivering information they sense is important, even if they do not fully understand why. It says, she continued, careful that it will go. But it says you should look at what it left. She pointed to the floor, to the intersection of the 2 cracks in the altar stone. Something had been written there, in the stone itself. In the anterior language, in characters that had not existed in any human system of writing because they predated the human decision to write things down. I could see them clearly now. The presence, in pressing through the floor, in cracking the altar, had not been damaging the stone. It had been carving. It was already withdrawing. I could feel it, the saturation in the walls, the anterior texture receding. The temperature in the room climbing back towards something with a history. The column on the north wall was losing density, dispersing into the ordinary air of an ordinary room. It was leaving. But it had written something in my floor before it went. And I did not yet know what it said. Iris slept for 3 hours after that. Real sleep, the first in for days, Dal told me. Her voice carrying the particular texture of someone saying something they have been afraid to believe. The girl's chest rose and fell with the irregular rhythm of genuine unconscious rest, the small involuntary movements. The eyelids tracking whatever lived behind them in dreams, one hand opening and closing slowly around nothing. She looked like a child. She looked like exactly what she was and had always been, underneath everything else that had been layered over it tonight. I let them have that. I stood at the cracked altar, and I looked at the writing in the stone, and I did not touch it. Not yet. Reading anterior language is not like reading. Greek or Aramaic, or the older scripts that scholars of this era have not yet recovered from the ground. It is not decoding symbols. It is remembering, and remembering that far back is not a neutral act. It is expensive in ways that do not show on the surface. It costs orientation, the particular groundedness that keeps the present tense operational, that keeps the room solid and the child on the altar present, and the woman sitting on the floor beside her real and consequential and requiring my attention. I could not do it with Dal 3 feet away. I could not do it and also be available for what was still happening in this room. So I waited. An hour before dawn, Dal looked up. Is she free of it? she asked. Whatever was using her, is it gone? From her, yes, the qualification was accurate. The presence had withdrawn from Iris completely. The signature I had felt in her sternum was absent. The interior of the girl had returned to the ordinary texture of a child. The dense, forward-moving accumulation of a person who is still in the process of becoming. She would be fine. Better than fine. She would wake and eat and eventually not remember most of what had happened here as anything other than a period of being unwell. The way children process things they cannot metabolize, by reclassifying them as illness, as bad dreams, as something the body went through that the self does not need to claim. Dal heard the qualification, but not from the room, she said. It left something behind. Dal stood. She came to stand beside me at the altar, looking down at the cracks, at the writing that was not writing in any system she had access to. The characters meant nothing to her. She had no framework, no memory that went back far enough to make them anything but unusual marks in old stone. She looked at them the way you look at a face that you can see is expressing something, but whose language of expression you do not share. What does it say? I don't know yet. How long will it take to know? I looked at her. She was holding herself with the posture of someone who has made a decision and has not yet said it aloud. I recognized the posture, the held breath, the deliberate squaring of the shoulders, the jaw set not in aggression but in resolve. I had seen it for 1,000 years of people arriving at the threshold of the thing they were going to do regardless of cost. Dao, I want to pay for this. The words came out in a single contained line, as though she had been rehearsing them while I was looking at the stone. Whatever it costs. Whatever it cost you tonight, the one that went pale, she gestured toward Corey, still coiled around my fingers, still the color of something diminished. Whatever it costs to close whatever door is still open. I want to pay it. You don't know what the payment is. Tell me. I looked at the writing in the stone. I looked at Iris sleeping. I looked at Dal, who had carried her daughter through the dark and had stood with her back against a wall, while something that predated the gods rearranged the furniture of my temple and spoken through her child's mouth, who had not run, who had held her daughter's arm throughout, knuckles white. Continuous physical contact, even when she could not understand what was happening. Because contact was the one thing she could give. There are currencies this kind of transaction accepts, I said. Not blood, not service, not time. I watched her face. Memory. Dal was quiet. Not the memory of your daughter. Not your name, your history, your knowledge of yourself. Specific memories. The presence collects experiences from inside time, things it cannot generate itself, because it has no sequence, no before and after. It takes from people who have lived something specific, something irreplaceable. What would it take from me? I knew. I had felt it when the column had pressed against my cognition. I had felt the presence read the room, read the people in it, identify what each of us carried that it could not have. The first time you held her, I said, the moment she was born. The first time you understood what she was to you. Dal's face did not change. That was how I knew it had landed. That specific, she said. Not a question, that specific. I would still know she's my daughter. Yes, you would know it the way you know any fact. You would not feel it the way you feel it now. You would love her. I want to be clear about that. You would love her the way you love every true thing. But the specific illumination of that first moment, the thing it opened in you, that would be gone. Dal looked at Iris. Iris, who was sleeping with her cheek pressed against the altar stone. One hand open beside her face, breathing with the unconscious trust of a child who does not yet understand what her mother has already paid to carry her this far. "If I refuse," Dal said, "what happens?" "The writing stays. The door in the foundation stays open. In months, in seasons, the presence returns. Through the writing. Through what the writing is doing to the consecrations underneath." I paused. "And next time it will not come through your daughter. It will come through the temple itself. And a temple that becomes a permanent conduit for something anterior to the current world. That is not something I can contain. That changes what this place is. So the choice is my memory or your temple. The choice is your memory or everyone who comes to this temple in the next 100 years." Dal closed her eyes. 10 seconds. 15. The kind of silence that is not absence but work. The specific. Interior labor of a person deciding something that cannot be undone. She opened her eyes. "Tell me what to do." I told her. When she finished the last phrase, the writing in the stone pulsed once. The same single pulse I had felt from the presence all night. Attentive and unhurried. And then it was still. Dal exhaled. She looked at Iris. She looked at her for a long time, and I watched her face. I watched the exact moment it happened, a subtraction so precise and so total that what remained was still recognizably a mother's face, still carrying care and protectiveness and the long exhaustion of someone who has not slept in days. But the specific illumination was gone. The thing that had lived in her expression when she looked at her daughter. The particular quality of a person looking at the thing that first taught them what love was capable of. Absent, clean as a surgical removal, she still loved her daughter. She loved her the way you love a truth you have been told. Not the way you love something you discovered with your own hands, in the dark, in the first seconds of a new life. Iris would never know the difference. Dal would know it every day for the rest of her life, and would never be able to explain it to anyone. The payment was accepted. The door in the foundation closed. I stood at the cracked altar and held Corey, still pale, still diminished. And I understood the thing I had been avoiding all night. The presence had not come to threaten me. It had come to check, to confirm that I was still here. That something from before still existed inside time, still held a shape, still could be found. It had wanted to know if I still existed. And the cost of my answering, the cost of saying yes, you can still find me, had been a woman's first memory of her child. I had not stopped it. I could have refused to recognize the presence, could have kept my hands from the girl's sternum, could have chosen not to answer when it said my name. But I had wanted to know, too, if something from before still knew where I was. And now Dal carried the price of my wanting, folded into the space where the most important moment of her life used to live. Dawn came the way dawn always comes, without asking permission, without adjusting for what had happened in the dark. The temple looked the same from the door. The columns stood. The threshold was intact, the same threshold that had held for centuries, that had stopped things that believed themselves unstoppable. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, there was a cracked altar, and a sleeping child and a woman who would never again feel the things she felt when her daughter was first placed in her arms. That was the cost of a night that looked, from the outside, like nothing. I had been running this particular mathematics for 4,000 years. The visible damage and the invisible damage, and how they never correlate the way people expect them to. Wars leave rubble. The things that happen in temples in the dark leave no rubble. They leave only the changed faces of people who come out the other side carrying something they cannot describe. To anyone who was not there, Iris woke as the light reached the altar. She sat up slowly, with the careful movements of someone returning to a body after a long absence. checking it room by room, finding everything approximately where it was left. Her color was right. Her eyes tracked cleanly. She looked at the cracks in the stone beneath her and traced the longer one with one finger. Without apparent distress, the way a child traces something interesting that does not yet have a name. "Mama," she said. Dal, who had been sitting on the floor with her back against the altar, looked up. The look on her face was exactly what I had predicted: whole, present, loving, and faintly confused at its own wholeness. The way a person is confused when a room they expected to feel sacred feels merely familiar. She had not lost her daughter. She had not lost her love. She had lost the specific frequency of that love, the resonance that had first tuned itself to the precise fact of Iris's existence, and the absence left a space she could feel but not locate. "Mama," Iris said again, "I'm hungry." Dal laughed. The laugh was real. That, at least, was real. They left 2 hours later. After Iris had eaten dried fruit and flatbread and had walked the perimeter of the altar 3 times, studying the cracks with the focused attention of someone conducting a survey. Dal counted coins at the door from reflex, and I stopped her, and she did not argue. That told me something about how the night had rearranged her understanding of what could and could not be settled with coin. They walked down the hill. Iris held her mother's hand and looked at the morning with the ordinary appetite of a child who has somewhere to be. She glanced back once at the temple with an expression I could not read from that distance. I watched until they were out of sight. Then I went back inside. The cracks in the altar were permanent. 3,000-year-old stone does not heal from that kind of signature. The marks would be here when everyone who had breathed in this room tonight was long gone. And they would still mean what they meant now, in the language that predated the decision to give things meanings. I was here. I found you. We recognized each other. Some marks do not come out. Corey had regained approximately half her color by mid-morning, the grey-green retreating from the tip of her tail upward, the iridescence returning in fragments, like light coming back into a room as clouds move. She would be fully herself in days, perhaps weeks. She curled against the left side of my skull and was quiet, not in the withdrawn way of something depleted, but in the particular quiet of something that has been through something and is choosing to be still about it. I sat on the floor at the base of the altar, not on it, not at it, at its base, the ground-level position of someone who is not officiating anything, not presiding, simply occupying the space at the lowest available point. I sat there for a long time with the morning light coming through the east-facing door and falling across the cracked stone and illuminating the anterior, writing from a direction that made the carved characters look almost readable. Almost. The truth the night had produced was not the truth I had been navigating toward. I had been navigating toward protection, the child, the woman, the temple, the next 100 years of people who would bring their most serious questions here and deserve a room that was not a doorway to something anterior and indifferent. I had protected all of those things. But the actual truth, the one sitting in the center of my chest, with the weight of something that has been there for a very long time and has finally been acknowledged, was this: I had been glad when it said my name, when it confirmed that something from before still knew where I was, still looked, still found it relevant that I existed inside time and held a shape and could be found. After 4,000 years of watching everything that ever knew the original me become dust, something remained that remembered what I was before the story, before the name, before the sailors and the priests, and the hero with the mirror shield, and the version of me that has been told and retold until the telling has replaced the thing it describes. Something remembered the original, and I had let a woman pay the price of my gladness. That was the irony of immortality that I had never found a way to carry lightly. You accumulate. You become, over centuries, a thing shaped by an almost incomprehensible weight of choices and their consequences. And then a night comes when the oldest part of you, the part that predates the name, the story, the altar, that part wants something as simple and as destructively human as being recognized. And you cannot want that for free. You never can. 7 days after Dal and Iris left, I was in the eastern storeroom when I heard a sound from the main hall. Not a presence. Not a frequency in the floor. A sound with a source. Small, physical, localized. The sound of something being placed on stone. I came through the door with the serpents, already extended. The hall was empty. On the altar, on the cracked surface, at the exact intersection of the two fractures, sat a folded piece of cloth. Undyed linen, ordinary, the kind sold in any market in 300 miles. I did not touch it with my hands. I used the edge of a bronze implement to open it. Inside, a drawing. Chang, uneven line is up figures. The specific visual grammar of a hand still learning to translate what it sees into marks on a surface. A drawing of the temple. The columns, the doors, the threshold pattern. Completely accurate. As accurate as the drawings Dal had described from 3 weeks before Iris arrived, the ones a 7-year-old had made from a dream she should not have been able to have. Except Iris was gone. Back to her valley, back to her mother, back to her ordinary life. This drawing had been made by a different hand, smaller, younger, less practiced than Iris had been. A second child had found my temple in their sleep. And someone, or something, had left the drawing here, on my altar. At the intersection of the cracks, through which the presence had spoken, not slid under the door, not left at the threshold. On the altar. At the precise point. Whatever had placed this had either walked through the walls, or had been here already, inside the temple. Waiting for me to leave the main hall long enough to make the placement without being seen, I folded the cloth back over the drawing. The presence had said it was leaving. It had not said it was finished. 7 days. One drawing. A second child's hand already oriented toward this place. Already dreaming the columns and the doors and the threshold pattern with an accuracy that required more than imagination. It was not yet done. It was building something. And for the first time in 4,000 years, I did not know what it was building toward. If this story reached your heart, leave us a like and share it. What would you have done? And don't miss what comes next. Another memory Medusa never forgot.